Hi there, everyone. Welcome to another conversation with Middle East Monitor. I am Anjuman Rahman. Today we have joining us a psychiatrist, psychotherapist, Dr Samah Jabr, the head of the mental health unit at the Palestinian Ministry of Health. She is also an author and an assistant professor at George Washington University. Dr. Samah today will be discussing with us the mental health issues impacting Palestinian children in Gaza following Israel's recent rounds of bombardment against the Gaza Strip. So welcome, Dr. Samah Jabr. It is such a great pleasure having you here. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So as we are all aware, Gaza is currently overcoming Israel's attacks last month, which has killed 253 Palestinians, including 66 children, leaving more than thousands wounded. Although a ceasefire has been reached, many families continue to suffer, and it is the children who are amongst the most affected groups. Dr. Samah, can you begin by sharing us regarding the Gaza children who are living in constant fear of violence and have therefore developed long-term anxieties and physiological responses to stress, which can have long-lasting consequences? What are some of the harmful effects you have observed over the years in response to the war on Palestinian children?
First, let me tell you that children are almost half of the population in Gaza. Of course, they are most vulnerable because of that special stage in their development. They have not yet developed their defense mechanisms, and their minds are still growing, which makes them more vulnerable to atrocities. They are also living under the care of adults who are suffering too, suffering of very high rate of unemployment, of poverty. There is food insecurity in Gaza, and there has been repetitive attacks and assaults and massacres, 4 attacks over the last 13 years in Gaza. And with every attack, there is a new generation of people who get traumatized by atrocities and all the violence that is committed against certain neighborhoods in Gaza, but it is meant to leave a huge psychological impact on the people. I have been involved in working with colleagues and providing help for some people in Gaza, mental health professionals. I've been involved in helping the helpers for people who provide help to families and children in Gaza, but also working directly with people who have been under bombardment while they were under bombardment, because some of them needed to contact therapists, some parents needed to seek help so that they can support their children. Of course, the trauma is very special in Gaza because it is an ongoing, repetitive, superimposing on historical collective trauma. And there is no safe place in Gaza. We intervene sometimes while the traumatic situation is still taking place. Like, people were calling me, and I could hear the bombardment in the background as background noise of the conversation that I was having with them. That is a very unusual situation. And I have to say that mental health professionals are not equipped to provide suitable interventions in such a chaotic situation. What we do while people are still facing a very traumatizing threat is that we support them to be grounded and maintain a routine of their day in spite of all the difficulties. Then when the threatening situation ends, we encourage people to talk about what happened to them. So I have to say that the situation in Gaza is very special. It touches everybody. Every person is touched there. There are certain groups that are especially at risk. Children are among these special groups. Our tools and interventions as mental health professionals are very limited. And I truly believe that mental health is not only the responsibility of mental health providers, but I think it's the responsibility of politicians, activists, every responsible citizen, and every responsible citizen of the world to engage in advocacy and stop the extreme violation of human rights of people in Gaza.
Mm-hmm. And Palestinians, Gaza, they've been living in decades-long and ongoing illegal blockade on the Strip. How does this impact the services and help provided by health officials and mental health specialists to the children? What sort of unique problems do they struggle with when it comes to providing help? And what have you found to be the most effective and successful methods of treatment for these Palestinian children?
Of course, the long-term blockade debilitates the health of Palestinians there. And Palestinians were facing the COVID just before the big assault that took place in May. And while we were providing help for people under bombardment, some of them were affected by COVID, were patients suffering from COVID at the same time. And some were talking about other affected members in their families and the impossibility to provide, they had to deal with the logistics of providing oxygen for the elderly father and so on. So it's a tough situation, and there are different layers of difficulties. Of course, the health system is deprived because Gaza is closed and there is a partition between Palestinians, but also mental health services are most deprived in comparison to other fields of medicine and health. So that's another lesson to learn from the atrocities and times of crisis. I think we need to prepare in advance and equip the health system and the mental health system and strengthen it to be able to respond in times of crisis and trauma.
You pointed out that mental health services is the most deprived service. Could this be a factor of, Gaza is quite a conservative Palestinian society, and there is an acknowledgement of a stigma associated with psychiatric treatment?
I don't think that Gaza regarding stigma and the being conservative, I don't think that Gaza is any different than other areas in Palestine or in the Arab world. Mm-hmm. I think the deprivation is mainly political, and it is part of the punishment and the isolation of the Palestinian people. It's part of the political agenda that makes health not a priority for people. And when people are deprived and resources are very minimal, usually the physical health is given the priority because physical health is more visible than the psychological well-being of people, the psychological damage and injuries that happen to people. Still, the situation in Gaza, because Gaza is isolated, and we are talking about the whole community, whole population that is traumatized. So the therapists that we work with are traumatized themselves. They have a lot of suffering, and sometimes it is difficult for people to provide help to other traumatized people when they are living in the same situation with the same conditions. And usually with a traumatic event, all their traumas surface. A current traumatic situation would open channels for all their traumas to come. And we can imagine how this situation is like the life of people in Gaza is so full of traumatic events. And there is also grief, cycles of grief. Some families were eradicated completely, and the number of injured people and people who lost homes and were displaced, all of that brings a lot of suffering and grief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a study conducted last year found that over 50% of Palestinian children suffer from PTSD and nearly 90% suffer from personal trauma. And also the rates of suicides and attempted suicides rose a lot last year. What action is being taken to deal with this issue?
I'm a little reserved about jumping quickly to quantifying the pain and suffering of people, especially because in order to translate our suffering to the outside community, we need to speak a language that is not, that doesn't best fit our experience, because some of these descriptions like anxiety, depression, PTSD, they can reduce the suffering and the pathology within the mind of the person. And usually the suffering is within the context, within the environment. Of course, I don't deny that there is a lot of pain and suffering for Palestinians, but it is due to a very pathogenizing situation. So I would be slow to measure the suffering of people and do surveys and express that suffering in numbers and in diagnostic categories that did not develop in Gaza, but developed outside in different contexts and are usually imposed in Gaza. Yes, there is a lot of suffering when people were calling for help. They spoke about children who are freezing at the time of bombardment. They could not move or walk to escape. They talked about bedwetting at night. They talked about somatization, headaches, abdominal pain, fear and terror for adults and children when with every phase of bombardment that takes 30 to 40 minutes. And it was so scary and shocking for people. There is a lot of suffering, but I don't think that the best way to express that suffering is to quickly diagnose people and categorize them into this foreign description of pathologies. I do believe that many of these people improve when they go out of that context. And now the big challenge is not to pathologize people and medicate them, but to help people to improve by improving life conditions in Gaza and by providing a peaceful environment around them, and by holding Israel accountable to all the atrocities that have been done to them, because also seeking justice and redress is a very important element in the recovery of people who are traumatized and exposed to severe injustices.
Mm-hmm. So based on your years of studying and working in this field, what would you say makes the mental sufferings in Palestinian children unique to the rest of the world? Like what are some of the problems they would suffer and emotional trauma they will be going through that isn't so common and people like us wouldn't be aware of?
I think the intensity of violence and atrocities that are surrounding them is so huge. Like usually when we are trained to provide interventions for people who are traumatized, we are talking about a primary event, like primary trauma, like trauma type 1. where a person had a car accident or had a severe injury. But I think in the life of a Palestinian child, first they come from a background of historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, collective trauma that touches the whole community. They have other family members who are traumatized. 80% of the people in Gaza come from refugees families. So they lost their homes, and the story of that huge loss stays within the family. Their parents or uncles participated in the uprising, in the Intifada. Many of them got arrested or got killed, and now they are witnessing multiple wars and massacres and assaults on the top of severe poverty, food insecurity, unemployment. There is no horizon to look for. The closure of Gaza is killing the dreams and the hopes for many people. So that intensity of violence and trauma is unique in Gaza. Gaza looks like a big concentration camp. And on the top of that, there is international apathy about what's taking place in Gaza. And that by itself is traumatizing also, to when people feel that important powers in the world, official regimes side with the aggressor and say that Israel has the right to defend itself, and they ignore all the killing that takes place in Gaza. Parents and families and the Gazan community is blamed when their children are killed. That is also unique in the case of Palestine, because Palestinian adults are blamed for the killing of their children by the Israeli occupation forces. Mm-hmm. That is traumatizing people further and further.
Mm-hmm. Many of these Palestinians, they've survived the 7 weeks of the 2014 Gaza war and now have gone through this, which has been described worse than the 2014 Gaza war. What are your fears when it comes to the state of these children who have witnessed both wars, when it comes to their psychological trauma and the way they would suffer? Do you think they even had time to heal from previous wars and what they've been?
I think that with this intensity and repetition of atrocities, the personality of people change, their core beliefs, their view of the world would change. This kind of trauma changes the whole mindset of people. And I don't think that our usual intervention techniques in primary trauma would work for them. I think that solidarity and advocacy and supporting people to regain their agency would help them to heal and recover spiritually and psychologically. And this happens when they stop seeing themselves as subjugated, objectified individuals, but as acting individuals who can express their feelings and express their will and express their aspiration for freedom and liberty. And I think that the international community and the people outside Gaza, Palestinians, all Palestinians outside Gaza, they have the power to participate in the recovery of people in Gaza by expressing their solidarity and by helping the people in Gaza to refine their agency and to be actors and survivors of what's happening to them, not only passive victims who are objectified and subjugated.
Mm-hmm. What have you found like what type of people do you find to be the most resilient and who stay the most positive in such a toxic atmosphere in Gaza? Is there any that you've noticed and that you can share an insight on what helps them the most to stay hopeful? Because loss of hope is a major factor in them getting depression or.
Let me first correct one misconception, because we think that people are either resilient or not resilient. And resilience is something dynamic. It's like people can be resilient at certain moments, but not resilient in other moments. And people can be traumatized and show some signs of resilience at a certain point. And resilience does not only lie within the individual. I think there are some collective elements and factors that can encourage the resilience of individuals, and we should not ignore that. So it's not completely dependent on the individuals. And before me, Dr. Iyad Sarraj, a psychiatrist, a leading psychiatrist in Gaza who passed away a few years ago, he spoke. I think it was part of his research. He showed that the children who participated in funerals and who were actors, who participated in demonstrations, who were active in some nationalistic events, they were more resilient than others. And this is what we observe all the time. When people try to express their agency and be actors, this is a sign of health, and it helps them. It helps them, the ones who are engaged in the action, but it also can help others when some actors do their action in the name of the group. It can be encouraging for the whole Palestinian community, or the whole community of oppressed people who are under threat and under attack.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting. Another thing you pointed out before during the discussion was the mental health specialists who provide the help are also themselves can fall into a state of helplessness. So is there a protocol in place where they themselves seek therapy and help? And
yes, definitely. We are encouraging colleagues to seek help, especially when they are themselves affected by loss or trauma, grief, home demolition, and to connect with people outside the reality as well. And I've been involved, in fact, in a TOT for therapists in Gaza who would provide help later on to their colleagues who are not necessarily from the field of mental health, but some of the people who were involved in rescuing others, in getting bodies from underneath bombardment, in some people who work in first aid. All of these people during the time of attack and threat, they work automatically. They disconnect with their emotions. But later on, at the time of relaxation, they start suffering from nightmares, hypervigilance, avoidance, and many of them would require help. So we are aware of that, and we are trying to collaborate with colleagues in Gaza to develop capacities so that they can provide necessary and needed interventions. I'm also involved in developing manuals for colleagues who would intervene to help children who have this special kind of trauma, this multiple intensified trauma of political violence that also renders parents helpless sometimes and unable to protect them. And it might also cause other kind of violence within homes or within schools. So we need to take that into consideration.
Okay. And how can the international community help when it comes to helping the psychological trauma of Palestinians in Gaza? Because when it comes to physical injuries, obviously people can donate and raise awareness. How can people approach the mental health trauma in Palestine? How can more awareness be raised around that?
I think the most valuable help is political support for Palestinians through activism, through generating knowledge about what's taking place in Palestine. That's the most valuable and needed. And supporting Palestinians and helping them and being in solidarity with them when they are active agents, not only when they are victims. Criticizing Palestinians when they fight for freedom and supporting them only when they bleed and when they are dead bodies. I think solidarity should recognize that Palestinians need to stand up for all these atrocities and express their wishes for liberty and freedom. And Palestinians should not be blamed for bringing further atrocities from Israelis upon themselves. Mm-hmm. Sometimes this blame, this reproach is used against Palestinians. And of course, there are many areas of helping Palestinians to develop their medical system, their health system, calling for an end to the siege, creating advocacy on behalf of Palestinians, so there will be access for patients who need to go out of Palestine, for youth who want to have an education outside Gaza. There are so many areas of support and for support that is focused on restoring the human rights for Palestinians and stopping the violation against Palestinians. And that is the primary goal that the international community should focus on. And Palestinians will take care of the rest of things. Palestinians will take care of the healing and the injuries and all what we are doing to support each other.
Okay. Thank you so much. You've highlighted a lot of valid points. Is there anything else you'd like to make a point about? Anything else you'd like to add?
I want to thank you very much for your interest and your questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Samah, for your time. We're really honored to have this discussion with you. And thank you for the viewers who joined today. Please join us next week as well for the next conversation. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Samah. I'll see you next time.